midst today, Dr. Clerinx from the Tropical Institute of Antwerp, who is going to give us a lecture tonight. But before we start the program, I want to call the greatest MOG among us, person of Gabriel Go, to open the event with prayer. Thank you.
Thank you. Please let's be as a reference God. Father, in the name of Jesus, we thank you for a day like this. It's by your power that we are gathered here. We pray thee, O Lord, that as many that come on their way, O Lord, that you lead them to this place in the mighty name of Jesus, without any problem, in the mighty name of Jesus. Those who are contemplating in their heart whether they come or not, Father, fasten their heart and change their mindset. Let them attend this program today in the name of Jesus. Lord, we thank you for the organizing of this program. That many of us don't always like to attend programs. There's no knowledge that's lost. Every knowledge that we acquire, it is from you, Almighty. Lord, we thank you on behalf of the organizer of this program. Father, may you begin to flourish them. Whatever they lay down upon, be with them. Strengthen their work, strengthen their organization, strengthen their family in the name of Jesus. The doctor that is here to give us a lecture as eye-opener, it's not our field, that is his field, areas of consideration. But I will pray that you use him in a mighty way in the name of Jesus. At the end, O Lord, your name will glorify. All of us that attend this program today, O Lord, Father, we pray that we will not go empty-handed. We will go home with the knowledge and with your impact in the mighty name of Jesus. Above all, we say thank you. Thank you for bringing us here. As we go back, go with us. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
Thank you.
He talked about Ebola, but his points are very clear. It's a spectacular virus, but rather easy to contain if you know how to do that, and if you know how to convince people to follow the rules. So that's the entire game, because actually it's a virus that cannot sustain itself into a human being for long. Either you die, or you get cured, and then you are immune, and the virus is gone. I mean, at least after 1 month, after having cleared the virus from the blood, the virus will also be cleared from all the other body fluids, and you are not affected anymore. So this is point number one, and we all remember that it started in the area what we call La Guinée forestière, in the backwaters of Guinea, around Macenta, and then it's very close to the Liberian border and the Sierra Leone border, and in that area it's around the same people, you know, and they have been married all over. So if one village has a big party, well, people come from 50 kilometers further from across the border because they are family members. And that's how the whole thing got. And then, you see, there is a main road from Zerekore to Conakry. It's rather easy to go there. And there are many roads, also small roads that go into Liberia and to Sierra Leone in that area. So you cannot really contain the people. And if you cannot contain the people who are infected, then you cannot contain the virus. And that's exactly what happened. This was from the September, so everybody got into an alarm, because actually from September onwards, the number of cases that went up and up and up and up tremendously, and throughout the entire region. So that means only in the north of Guinea and in the east of Guinea, there were not so many cases, but in the center of Guinea and in the capital town those days, because actually the people were infected in Guinea Forestier, took the bus, went to family members, got sick there, got other contaminated, because in the beginning nobody knew that this virus was already there. So they got actually a lot of people contaminated, then it went on and on and on, because actually they did not have the means to protect themselves. And then the sick people went to hospital, everybody thought, maybe it's malaria, or it's the flu, or whatever. They took blood, they did not take any precautions, they got infected. And then the nurses died, and the doctors died. That's how it came. And so everybody got into alarm, all of a sudden. But it took quite some time. And I have shown that graph. That was you see on the left side the number of cases infected. And this was end of October, November. About 10,000 people infected. And then, if you see how it continues to grow, we should have got around 80,000, 100,000 people infected by January, if nothing was done. But something got done. First, and the thing that got done is that, especially in Liberia, the American army came into a big way, and they brought a lot of materials, and they could set up a lot of treatment centers. And then the government got tough and compelled the people, those who are sick, go to the treatment center and not stay home. And then, because of a lot of people got informed, they formed a lot of people also to inform other people, to go around in the community and say, well, you have to take this seriously. This is a really important thing to reckon with. And then everybody got soap, everybody got bleach water, so that they could actually prevent it from passing from one person to another. And that's how also it spectacularly went down. Is that it sneaks away through the blood and through the white blood cells in the first place, and makes the white blood cells not to react to the virus. You know, in human immunology, the immune system fights against everything that is foreign into the blood. Everything that is known into the blood, it doesn't react to that, but everything is foreign that usually reacts. Also, if Ebola virus comes into the blood, the white blood cells start reacting. But this virus, they secrete some antibodies, and the immune response is a bit sluggish then. It becomes very, very late. It's got delayed. Why? Because actually this virus, you can compare that to a warplane that has been hit, not yet hit by a rocket, but to which a rocket is fired. And this warplane, it dispels some crystals and all that to divert that rocket, so that the rocket will not hit the warplane. I mean, with the Ebola virus, it's the same thing. I mean, it scatters some proteins, and the immune system is fighting these proteins, but they are not the virus. So the immune system in the first week is actually not acting. It's acting, but not against the virus, against a lot of other things that the virus sheds, but no effect on the virus. And that's why, from day 1 to day 7, you get 1 million more times virus in your blood. It goes very fast. So that means after 1 week, you get also 1 million times more infectious for somebody else. Or at least 1,000 times, if you do that in a square box. So it's not that clever a virus, after all. And we have drug target jets. We know what to fight with a vaccine. We know what to target with the vaccine to make it a good vaccine. We know what kind of drugs might work and how they work. So we know already quite a lot about this virus. And we know also when you get sick after being contaminated. Anything between a couple of days and about 21 days at most. But as an average, you go to a funeral, somebody dies of Ebola, and you just clean the body or just touch the head and all that. You get sick about 8, 9, 10 days after that. We know that. And of course, Ebola is like a bacterial infection that get into the blood, a serious one. It destroys one by one the important organs: the liver, the kidneys, the blood constituents. It starts people getting bleeding. It starts people getting diarrhea because the gut is affected too. So, but that we see also with other infections. It's not only with Ebola virus that we see that. And then, of course, it has some impact on the local scene. What does it do?
Deep in the thick forests of eastern Sierra Leone lies the village of Njangima. Here, in the most Ebola-afflicted district of Clerinx. This is the hardest hit village.
61 people died in this town. Everybody is affected now.
Nearly 1 in 10 people were killed in the span of a few months. Across West West Africa. Almost 1,000 people have now died in what has become the worst Ebola outbreak in history. In this small farming community, the scars are all too clear.
One husband, his wife, and a child died. We are still on the same day.
The homes of the dead remain frozen in time.
Here are 5. They all die here. The whole family. The person who died in this house, they say the treasure. We were afraid for touch it.
All the rooms were disinfected by local volunteers. Most villagers refused to go near them. Military troops have set up checkpoints all over the region to stop the spread of the disease. For now, the situation in Njala has stabilized.
Everybody is strong now. It has been 25 days. We don't have no patient here.
But for villagers, the damage has already been done.
They are all 15 of them. They are living with them now. So if you think about the kind of people that have died, it will be very difficult to forget.
So you can imagine how difficult it is to react to that, because one person dies and yet nobody is really too much worried. 2 persons dies in one family, 2, 3 people die, but they don't die at the same moment. There might be 1 week between or 2 weeks between the infections. So it's only after some time that it becomes clear that they have a big problem. And by the time that they know that they have a big problem, it has spread already. So that's a problem. But if in one village or in a few villages the alarm has been raised, then of course the other communities can be said, oh well, if this occurs, immediately call the regional sanitation authority. But those days they had no regional sanitation authority. People had died, the nurses had died, doctors had died. Nobody wanted to go to the hospital because they thought, well, we go to the hospital, we get infected, so we stay away from the hospital. So that the entire system that went worse and worse and worse because there was nothing there to act. But some things have changed. How to prevent it? Well, there are a couple of things that we can do. First of all, isolate the sick people, so that they do not spread the virus among the other people. And then for the sick people, at least you can do something. Give them anti-inflammatory drugs, give them antibiotics, give them enough to drink, maybe an intravenous drip if there is enough personnel around. And then you can see that instead of 90% of the people dying, 50% of the people are dying. And if you manage to get intravenous fluid, maybe 30% of the people are dying. And it depends on whom. The youngsters, they will survive. I mean, the old people, they will die more readily because they are more easily unbalanced by the disease. So that's one thing that we can do. But it's easier said than done. And to illustrate it, I'll show you this.
This city of 1.5 million is the first major metropolitan area to face an Ebola outbreak since the virus was discovered in 1976. Hundreds have died here since the outbreak began in May. And the World Health Organization expects thousands of new cases in the coming weeks. With a limited number of hospital beds and personnel to treat the sick, many of the infected are left to die at the hospital gates.
It's heartbreaking. There's nothing I can do about it because I have no space, I don't have the capacity.
Local and foreign
have been able to cope with outbreaks that have been going on from year to year because they have been small. But at the moment we are down on our knees. So who else is there?
They were angry, looking them to go home.
They say because they think we now look at us, so we should get right to the heart.
The hospital worker finally came out to calm the crowd. Later in the afternoon, Gato was finally admitted. For his family,
But the number of people sick was doubling every week. And that means after 1 month it was 8 times more. And then all of a sudden, that this was in Monrovia, of course, then the Americans came with their army. And they made a lot of camps and also centers for diagnosis, because actually when you get sick, it's not necessarily Ebola. It can also be dysentery or it can be malaria. So yeah, they had to do some tests too. They had to assume that it might be Ebola, but they have to confirm it by doing a test. And that took always a few days. So that means these centers had a space for suspected Ebola patients and then confirmed Ebola patients. So that was difficult to handle, because also in the suspected Ebola patients area, they should also take care not for the people who are there not to contaminate each other. So in the beginning that was not an easy matter to do, and I think there are a lot of people have been contaminated in the hospital too, who are not really Ebola. So to prevent the spread, we know what needs to be done, but it's again easy to say. Disinfection. Luckily there is something like bleach water. Bleach water is cheap. It's very effective against the virus. You can spread it around with these sprayers, and this kills the virus on contact. So that means even the bodies who are full of virus and the sweat is full of virus, you can spray them with chlorine, and they get on the surface, at least they will be decontaminated for a while. So that's why you see all these people always with the sprayers around, because where the people have been urinating or defecating or sweat or so, and they just have to contaminate, because the virus will be there for a couple of days, if not done. And if you come in contact with this fluid, you might be contaminated just by stepping on it. That was one of the problems too. And then of course the other thing is safe burials. That means that the people cannot touch the dead body, because the dead body is very infectious, and how to handle that and to get it accepted by the community. Not an easy matter neither.
they call themselves the Burial Boys. A ragtag group of around 20 men, most in their early 20s, that make up the dead body management team in Eastern Sierra Leone. Just months ago, they were students and taxi drivers. Since the outbreak began in Big Bang, they have been on the front line of the fight against the Ebola outbreak, still more than 1,300 across West Africa.
When somebody died from this virus, that body is more dangerous.
One unsafe touch could put an entire village at risk. Trained by Doctors Without Borders, supported by the Red Cross, it's the Burial Boys' job to let that happen.
We are trained and we are ready for
Their day starts with a morning when a call comes in about a new dead body.
we have a community burial today. We have
Their area of coverage is Kailan District, the hardest hit in the country, around the size of Rhode Island. Roads are unforgiving. A team of 7 drive up into hours to get from one victim to another. The pay, $6 a day.
I sacrifice myself for my country. If I don't volunteer, who can volunteer to do it now? Listen, please.
We are fighting by
Back in Bangkok, the team finishes very important.
Until the Ebola virus is over, I will stay here. If I have to all along life, I can go to I can talk to them. I'm doing this job for you. Maybe they can understand me better from now.
Turning them away, putting them away. It's a strange way of acting, isn't it? I mean, I'm very surprised that they have so little community support, and that in some villages, of course, they've been chased away and others have been killed. There have been instances of where these burial teams, people from the burial team being killed by villagers, because they didn't want them to come and remove the corpses. But should you do that? If I was governor of a place, I would say, okay, you don't want these teams in it, okay. We cordon the whole place and let it stew. Or you could say, well, when is it time that you come to reason? And maybe somebody has to wait some time before it comes to reason. If 1 out of 10 persons in the village has died, maybe people come to reason. Then they start thinking differently. So that's always the case, you know. If you have just one case, they make a fuss. If you have a lot of cases, then it's an emergency. Then they start listening. And well, it's appalling that these youngsters have no more support. They say, well, thank you that you did. At least there's no risk for the other people. So contact tracing is, of course, now standard. And active case finding, actually, somebody said, he's sick, or active case finding is more than that. It's just going from house to house. And they had these lockdown in Sierra Leone, where then the community workers go house to house to see whether there's any sick persons. And when there are sick persons, to see whether they have to admit it to an Ebola center or to another center. That's how things get more or less out of control. And of course you have to explain to people over again, tell stories about that, but not inventive stories that are more or less truthful. And then if everybody starts to shout, whether it's true or not, then of course you get a lot of cacophony, and that's what's happening in the beginning. Then, are these actions effective? Well, this is a bit of a difficult graph. I'll show you this way. This was a calculation done on what we know about the spread of the virus. And they'll say, okay, when we get about daily Ebola cases 40 in that area, what is the best way to diminish the number of persons? Hygienic burial of hospital deaths. That means that at least we can dispose of the body without contaminating the rest. Okay, if we do that in a large scale, then the number of new cases will go down over time, but it might take a long time, 1 year. You do, on top of that, isolation of suspected cases, and you can have up to 100% of the community identified and then isolated. Then also goes down the number of new cases over the few months, but it takes still a long time for it to disappear. And you do both of them, then you get that red line, then it goes much faster. If you isolate the people and assure a safe burial, then it goes very, very fast. And then the other measures, okay, you can add them, but they are not so essential. So basically, control is just two things. Identifying ill people, get them isolated and treated, identifying the bodies and get them buried safely. And the whole thing will disappear. But that's the problem. Because the people say a lot of things.
Are rumor and suspicion hindering the fight against Ebola in West Africa? A 2-year-old boy named Emil is officially thought to be the first case of the outbreak. He lived in what's considered the epidemic's ground zero, a dense forest linking Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. But it's unclear how he got Ebola, possibly from a fruit bat.
We brought him to the health center. They gave us medicine. But despite this, when we returned home, he died that night.
Some local officials believe a woman got infected in Sierra Leone and crossed the border, spreading it to Guinea.
It's the woman who came, who left a village in Sierra Leone where there were many deaths, and many Guineans are married in that village.
And conspiracy theories abound, like white men employing a vaccine campaign to kill those who live in the forest, the government using the epidemic to take control of people and land, and outside governments trying to delay elections to first seal business deals. These suspicions reflected deep resistance among West Africans to foreigners and authorities in a very poor region long mined for its wealth of natural resources.
Rumors and conspiracy theories are raised up and discussed and spread because it's the only way to connect an uncertain situation where explanation is not clear at all in some kind of survival and intellectual response.
The mistrust has turned residents against those trying to combat Ebola, which has now killed more than 6,000 victims. Some villages in Guinea beat up healthcare workers and erected barricades to keep them out.
That's where, for example, anthropologists intervene to do some kind of translation of what is the logic and rational view inside what seems to be totally irrational.
Anthropologists say bridging that divide, that gap in understanding between those who can help and those who need help, is a key to ending Ebola. Cindy Sharp, Associated Press.
And that's exactly an important point. Actually, you can just tell the people, you do this and you do that. If you are in a certain situation and somebody else tells you if you do this or this or that, would you do that? Not necessarily if you do not see the logic of it. So the thing is, the anthropologists, they have an important role because they have to ask the people, why do you react like that if this is there? And sometimes they come up with explanations which we were not aware of. And they say, oh, well, if you do that, but, well, that can be logic, but not in this case, and because of this. So people are not stupid, you have to explain them well. And sometimes you have, because of the context, preset belief, and this Ebola is a new thing. So if people have believed in one thing already for many years, and all of a sudden there comes something up that completely upsets the way of thinking, it will take some time for them to see and to accept and to know. And that makes the delay. And that makes also why this epidemic is really whack out of hand. I mean, it goes very far. So what we have now, all these green dots are treatment centers all over the place. Sierra Leone, Guinea, Liberia. In Liberia, there are a lot of centers, there is no case at this moment. But there are a lot of centers in case some cases reappear. Because we have to wait a little bit more before the whole thing calms down. So this is the situation now. This was the beginning of the epidemic, was in this area. No cases anymore. Either the people know, or some people might be immune, cannot get infected anymore. Probably the combination of both. And then it's still spread around Conakry, it's still spread around Freetown area. In this area, there were not so many cases before. Now, this is not an easy area to go to. Bad roads and all that, and people not very well informed. And well, we are now at the center of the epidemic in Guinea. And I have to look. We have to look at the charts. It's very important. How does it run the epidemic? This is Liberia, March 2014. No case, no case, no case. Here just a few cases. And then all of a sudden it went slightly up, not that much, until July, and then all of a sudden it went, wow, 400 cases a week. So that was tremendous. And then you saw that presentation about Monrovia and the hospital there being overwhelmed. That was here. That was in that period. Then the Americans came in a big way, dropped, and then it petered out. Because actually this was mainly in Monrovia, and then they had to establish centers all over the place to get the rest of the population also covered. And then now we are at just one case last week. And that one case probably has not infected anybody else. So probably in Liberia, the thing is over. So what happened to Sierra Leone? The same thing, but a bit later. In Liberia, you got the peak here. Sierra Leone, you got it 2 months later. Also because of Sierra Leone was not that well organized. In those days there was no American army there. And but they got enough centers to treat and to burial people trained for safe burial, and then all again that dropped. And then it's still dropping, much more slowly, but it's dropping. But it rises spectacularly and it goes down spectacularly. Both will go. But when you speak French, it doesn't happen that way. This is Guinea. What happened in Guinea? There were never at one time enormous amount of cases, but it festers on. It's like a festering wound, not healing. Always new people popping up with Ebola from some areas. And the problem with Guinea is that they had a weak government for quite some time. Government is not convincing the people. And the people will say, well, fuck the government. And they do what they want. They do not care about safe burying people. They do not care about people going to treatment centers. They are there, but they don't trust. That's why it's still going on and going. And probably, my prediction is that probably in Liberia it will be over. In Sierra Leone it might take another few months and then it will be completely over, but it's almost over. And in Guinea, if it continues like that, it might take a year. But the problem is, even if it's like this, everybody has to be alert. You cannot just sleep quietly, because there might be still some cases popping up. And that's very strenuous. You do not see cases, or almost no cases. And then you have to look for the needle in the haystack. You have a small needle somewhere among this amount of hay. I mean, you can't find it. And then, if you do not stay alert, well, it starts again somewhere. So this is a problem. How can we solve this problem? Well, treating. I told you we have treatment, yes, but does it work? Question mark. We have this. We have favipiravir, that anti-flu drug. It's effective against flu. It's effective against Ebola when given to guinea pigs infected with Ebola. And it has been tried on people right now. About 80 people have been treated with that. And the number of people dying after being treated is less than before. But not much less than before. And the problem is, when looking at that population that's been treated with favipiravir, only small amount, about 20, 25, have been treated within the first 2 days, 3 days from the illness. And most have been treated on the fourth day and the fifth day when it was already too late. So at that moment, probably the drug will not help anymore. I mean, you have to, the drug might be very effective. For example, you, as a health worker, you work in Ebola setting, you have a needle stick on your finger, and before you get sick, you should take that drug to prevent you being sick. Probably that will work. So finding new cases actually to treat. So that means it takes much more time for the conclusions to come. We need another few months to know that for sure. And this is going on in Guinea, and we know that in Guinea there are still some cases popping up here and there. So probably within 2 months we might know whether this really works or at least helps to survive. And then the other drugs, forget drugs. Principium has been tried in Liberia, and then they stopped it because first of all there were not enough cases. Second of all, they did not find much of a good effect. Probably also for the same reasons. Too few people and coming too late for the drug to be taken. And then the other drugs were actually still too experimental. They have not been put forward for use. Some people have been treated here in the West. Some repatriated workers have been treated with taking Ebola, but on a case-by-case basis, just hoping that it would do something before, and we don't know exactly whether this really has an impact. So, well, this is maybe something that we can forget. The Institute of Tropical Medicine is involved in the blood transfusion from people who have survived. So actually, they collect blood and plasma because you can give plasma. So plasma is nothing but blood without red blood cells, just the yellow stuff. So, and blood you cannot give every week, but plasma you can give every week almost, because actually it contains proteins and the body continues to remake these proteins that you've given with the plasma. When they take the plasma, they take the blood with you, they filter the red blood cells, and they give the red blood cells back to your vein. But they keep the proteins. And these proteins have antibodies fighting against the virus. So we are interested in having these antibodies. Blood cells are not so important, but these proteins are important. So this is going on, but it requires a lot of effort. First of all, we have to find survivors. Second of all, the survivors have to be, surviving for long enough so that we are sure that there are no virus anymore anywhere in the blood or in the body fluids or so. That takes about 1 month after the fever drops. And then these people have to be convinced also, well, it might be worthwhile to give blood. And maybe a lot of these people say, well, nobody wants of us because actually they still think that we have a virus, and you ask now to give blood? No, forget it, we've run away. So they might not be very motivated either. So that's the problem. And also the people who are sick, they might not be very happy to receive blood, except that they've been giving plasma, unless you make them understood what it's all about. And you could do that, of course. It takes some time for you to do, but that's what the team's doing. So we're not just coming, oh, well, you need blood, prick a needle in it, and no. You have to explain why and what you can expect from it, etc. And maybe the best thing to do is, when they come early, what I believe personally the best cure at that moment that could be is when you get sick early, you get favipiravir and you get this serum from people who survived at the same time. This might even work better. And then we hope then that only maybe 10% or even less will die. But that's when you get sick. But what can we do before you get sick? That's vaccines. We know that vaccines work. These 3 vaccines there are 2 of the 3 vaccines that are now given to healthcare workers in the first place. Because actually these are the most at risk. The nurses, the doctors, the waste, the people who treated the waste of the hospitals and all that, these need to be vaccinated. And these vaccines have been tried first of all in people here, healthy people, to see whether the vaccine doesn't cause any harm. And a few hundred of people have received the vaccine and it does not cause harm. So that means that as long as it does not cause harm, the next phase is to see whether it helps. First of all, when you make a drug or you make a vaccine, the first concern is, might it harm the people or not? You have to be sure that it doesn't harm. So we give it to healthy people who are volunteering. That's what's done here. There are people here in Switzerland, in Italy, in England, who are volunteered to be vaccinated, to see whether that doesn't cause fever. One of the vaccines sometimes caused a bit of fever, but that was not really bad. It's like you had a tetanus vaccine. If you have a tetanus vaccine, sometimes you have fever 2 days in that. But that's not a big deal. It does not do any other harm. That's been shown. So, but that took about, say, 1 month, 2 months for the doctors to know. Because, first of all, you have to make enough vaccines. And you have to control the quality of the vaccines, that they're all the same and that there are not impurities in the vaccines and all that. And then you give them to volunteers, and then you wait about for 1 month for it to happen. Because what you have to study, do they have fever? Do there any other problems in or the kidneys or the liver? And then, third of all, do they develop antibodies? Can we show antibodies against Ebola in the blood after the vaccine? And from what moment and how much? So that means that you lose at least, say, 1, 2, 3 months before you know that. Because what we are interested at is not just giving the vaccine, but also knowing for how long the vaccine will protect potentially. Because we did not know exactly for how long this epidemic will still go, and maybe do I have to revaccinate after 3 months or so? That all needs to be studied. We don't know yet. So this is an ongoing process, and now we have 3 vaccine candidates. 2 are already there on the field. The next is coming, and the next one, the human adenovirus, the phase ongoing. This is vaccine made by Janssen Pharmaceutica from our own stock here, from a company from Cruza. But this is a candidate, probably the safest of all and the most effective of all, to be given to the people just to stop the epidemic if all the rest doesn't work. For example, we think about doing that in Guinea. I mean, when there is enough vaccine available, then to vaccinate everybody around. I mean, that means maybe 1 million people, just to stop it. If necessary. We don't know exactly whether it's necessary, but it might be necessary if, like in Guinea, as for the last year, it went on and off and on and off and on and off, it doesn't die. So if you vaccinate the people and you get 90% of the people protected, it will die. Even if 50% of the people get protected by that vaccine, it's enough for the epidemic to die at the longer run. If you get 90% protection, it dies within 3 weeks. So, well, this will be there in the coming few months. We have to see how it will be done. So that's one point.
They will accept the vaccination, yeah? Because you say that...
Yes, that will be the problem. I think the more people get the vaccine, the more it will be accepted. And especially it starts with healthcare workers. And if everybody knows that the healthcare workers are vaccinated because they want to be protected, and then the other can say, oh well, can we get protection too? It's a bit like HIV. First of all, nobody wants to use a preservative or condoms, and afterwards, well, it takes some time before the people accept that to do beneath the risk. Same thing with Ebola. And of course, for HIV there is no vaccine. And for Ebola it would be a vaccine. And the vaccine, it has been tried in monkeys, and it's very effective in monkeys to protect them against the virus. So if it's working in monkeys, it's just grown-up monkeys too. So that means it must work. It also must work in us. We are not that different. I mean, genetic-wise, we share about 98% of our genetic material with the chimpanzees. So if it works in chimpanzees, it should work in people too. So, well, there are some remaining questions, and one of the important questions that really I'm interested in, but we haven't got really much information about, how much people are in fact infected and immune without really doing a serious disease. In any disease, there are people who fall ill seriously and die, and there are also people who just got a little flu and then survive it. And it's quite possible that some people might have just some little fever for 1 or 2 or 3 days and then overcome it and then get immune. And they are not picked up because these people are not so sick that they are worried to go to the hospital. They are not checked, but they might be still there, and then they might be immune also. They cannot be infected a second time.
Those ones were maybe the one who was good one to take plasma.
Yeah, that's why in some families everybody dies, in other families just one person dies and the others do not die. Why is that? So there might be, or some viruses might be, no, it doesn't depend on the virus, it depends on the person. Some persons might have a stronger immune system that recognize the virus early, that has been proven already, and who have a better chance to survive when they get infected. And others, they have a very sluggish immune system that doesn't work in time, and the virus kills them before that starts kicking in. So that's one of the problems that we face. So, but it's interesting to know, it could be that, for example, every person getting admitted into a treatment center, there are maybe 2-3 persons who got the disease on a smaller scale and who are also immune. And then, of course, if you can extrapolate that, then in some villages where 10% of the people die, maybe 50% of the people are immune already. But then we have to take a blood sample of everybody in safe circumstances, do the antibody test, also ask them whether they want to contribute to this science, because it's important to know, especially if you want to do vaccine trials and all that. It's important to know that when you give a vaccine, that you give a vaccine to people who are not yet protected against the virus. Otherwise, you cannot really make out whether it's a vaccine or the protection from the person itself. So it's slightly complicated. So maybe what we know right now, well, dramatic improvement due to the three main factors: information, safe burial, and people treated in treatment center with a better survival rate anyway. Well, we know a lot of this virus already before this epidemic. We know now even more. Some medications might be effective, but well, the problem is that we have to give it early. And from some combinations we do not know. For example, this serum antibody treatment, we do not yet know. That's another 2 months before we know. And then maybe the most important thing now is most of the people are really convinced that Ebola exists. That's the first thing. If they don't accept that Ebola exists, well, they will not do anything to prevent it anyway. And then you say, well, that's Africa. But what about Belgium? Belgium was also caught unaware. What happened here? Barcelona hospital. No, it was Madrid hospital. It was not Madrid. There was an old father, this a priest being repatriated with the disease, and then a few nurses got the disease, and then everybody got big panic. But then it was because at that time the people were not so trained here to handle this kind of very complicated cases. And I mean, this is intensive care. We try to stick needles everywhere and give a lot of fluid and all that. And so the risk of being contaminated as a nurse is much higher than even in Africa, in that setting. So I mean, the precautions have to be very, very high standard. That was not the case. So luckily the nurses survived. But everybody got a little bit of panic. And then about Brussels Airlines, I remember one moment there was one guy from Brussels Airlines Pilot Association who called me and they said, well, shouldn't we stop flying to these places because actually we might have a risk of, first of all, importing cases and also being infected ourselves. I said, well, if you manage to control people being sick to get on the plane, the risk is minimal. And then there was a lot of talk with the people responsible for Brussels Airlines to stop it altogether. And then there was some strike, and then they stopped a few flights to Monrovia at the time, etc., etc. But after all, with discussion with me also, they say, well, if you stop the flights, there is no flight anymore to that region. It stops altogether, and then the people will sneak through other places to go, and it will be even much worse. So please fly, because actually also then doctors and nurses can fly, and supplies can fly, and the whole thing can start being put on the rails. I mean, you need to have treatment centers. You have to train people. You have to get a lot of people from here, because actually there are already so many people that died, also nurses and doctors. And then make a big fuss. So they accepted that, and also the personnel of the airline, they became a little bit more courageous, and they said, okay, we can keep on flying. And that's a good thing. We should really be thankful for these people to reflect and say, well, the risk is so small in these circumstances. If we are a bit careful and all that, we train ourselves to be extra careful, and then we can keep on flying to get the whole thing flowing. And then, at that time, there was some calculation done and said, well, which is the next country to have an Ebola case imported? Belgium, of course, because all the flights from these three countries are going through Belgium. And then what happened in Belgium? Nothing happened in Belgium. We got in all a couple of cases. Suspected cases, but no problem cases. But then, if you have to prepare for an epidemic in Belgium, and nobody is prepared, first of all you have to shout around. Who is going to do what? Everybody scrambles, everybody improvises. That's the first. So we did. At the Institute of Tropical Medicine, okay, we say, well, we have to build a small unit in case somebody comes at the consultation that we can actually take blood in safe circumstances and all that. We've been rebuilding small room for that, equipped with everything needed for elementary assessment. And then also in the University Hospital in Antwerp, we had to convince them also to be prepared in case there was a real case of Ebola. So that went a few months of effort, a lot of talks, and you know, at that time you had the new government, you had syndical unrest. I mean, the people were not really trained for that. The medical staff was not really trained for that. The nurses were not trained for that. So that needed to be organized. And there was a lot of shout from the press too. And the press said, "Wow, this Ebola thing." They pumped it up to proportions way beyond. And then, of course, if you do something in Belgium, you have to translate it in different languages. Okay. So that went around. I mean, we got work groups with different experts and a lot of talk around. And then one of our colleagues became the Ebola coordinator, Erika Vrien. And she did a very fine job. Getting everybody together, getting all the violins playing the same tune, and it went fine. And that's why there are a lot of partners. We had to talk to Sabina, we had to talk to the harbor, we had to talk to people who import diamonds from that area, etc., etc., etc. And we have to make sure that the entry points are safe. And then, that's why this temperature screening and all that, okay, it's maybe not very effective, but at least it was a way for the people to be aware. If you do something, maybe, I mean, the temperature screening had not much sense, but at least it made the people aware. So, that's what I say. And then we had to inform the family doctors, the other hospitals, how to handle a potential case and all that. Not an easy matter. Then we had a website created for Ebola, for information. And then, of course, we need to do the training itself and see which ambulances and which equipment in these ambulances, and can these ambulances be used for other purposes then later. That was quite a hassle. And then finally we had in Belgium 3 hospitals who were volunteering to accept a possible case. It was in Brussels, the Hôpital Saint-Pierre, and in Leuven, the University Hospital, and then of course in Antwerp, also the University Hospital, where we have our tropical disease unit. So, well, we are the Institute of Tropical Disease. Ebola is a tropical disease. We should not have said, okay, it's not our business. And we could not. So, reluctantly in the first place, but we accepted, okay, we played our show. For the diagnosis, a lot has changed too. Before, we had to send our samples to Hamburg to get analyzed, and then the next day we got results. Now we do it in a few hours' time in our own lab. But you know, because this was a dangerous virus, so the new techniques needed to develop to isolate this virus, or to demonstrate the virus in blood, but after decontamination of the blood, so that the virus could not spread. But then without destroying the virus, otherwise you cannot measure it. So that was quite a hassle too, but we succeeded in doing that. And that makes that, if somebody gets actually from Guinea with fever, and that might be Ebola, for example. In that case, we hospitalize him for a day or so in the university hospital. We do the blood test, and if the blood test is positive, then of course we have to treat him for Ebola. If the blood test is negative, then we wait for another 24 hours whether the fever stays and whether it's not malaria or something else. And if the fever is gone, then of course then the danger is gone too, because actually in Ebola you get fever one day and worse fever next day and still worse fever the other day. So that goes on and on and on. But sometimes you get a very innocuous fever, like just a one day flu fever, and the next day you're fine. So it happened a few times. In total we had about how many cases? Yeah. We had 11 cases in Belgium that were suspected of possibly infected with Ebola. Not probably, even possibly. Remote possibility. And all tested negative. So we had no single case in Belgium. We sent them over to the States.
It's true.
I mean, that one case that was treated in Texas, he flew by Brussels Airlines, and then he got sick when he was in the States. And there was another one, also flying to Brussels Airlines, he got sick another case. So that means that if you get onto a plane, you might not be sick yet. And of course then you are not dangerous for other passengers neither. Isolating suspected cases, and there was that famous case in the States, in New Jersey. I thought that they wanted to quarantine everybody coming back from Liberia or Sierra Leone or Guinea, irrespective whether they were diseased or not, or irrespective whether they had contact with the sick persons or not. So that was way overblown, and then I mean, this is a cartoon all about from that story. Yes, and you know, and you know, the Americans, they don't know very well their geography. So that's why the girl said, "I just came back from the library, not from Liberia." So the people, they don't know the difference between a library and Liberia. So there was we have never been so crazy to that extent. It was much more well down to earth in Belgium, definitely. And that's why I like working here, and I don't want to work in the States for this kind of reason. But that means, what's next? I think we go for 0. And we are prepared, more or less. We are never fully prepared 100%. I mean, 100% safety never exists. You step outside here, you can be overrun by a tram if you do not watch out well. So zero risk does not exist. But at least we know what to do. And we, in the previous months, I mean, we know what to do here, and we know now from the people over there what they do to limit it, and it works very well. So, just a last word. Ebola was a nightmare, but the nightmare is almost over. And now we have to think about the positive effects of it. Because there is no such thing as only a bad side. Every coin has its flip side. Also Ebola will have its flip side. I thank you for being here.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being judged. But Doctor, I have one thing to ask, just one question. It's going to be an advice anyway to we that came from this awareness lecture. What should be your advice to we that normally go to Africa and come back to Europe?
First of all, be truthful. I mean, not hiding risk contacts. Actually, that's what I was telling last time. Then the risk was high, now the risk is very low, because if in Liberia there are no cases anymore, you cannot get infected there. If in Sierra Leone it's in some areas much less than before, actually the risk of getting infected is very low. But if you get infected, it's better not to conceal that. If you conceal that, you make big problems. You must have heard about that health official from the ministry, and he flew through Nigeria, and he was already sick and managed to get into the plane. When coming in Nigeria, he did not tell anybody that he was in contact with Ebola. He infected 21 persons altogether. About 10 died. The doctor who was treating him also died. And then there was his contact, who flew to Port Harcourt, and his contact person over there, he was infected on the airport when he was meeting him. And then he thought indeed that the contact person was suspicious, and they said, oh well, it might be infected, so he absconded to Port Harcourt, and then convinced a doctor to be to lock him up in a hotel and to treat him in a hotel with fluid and antibiotics and all that. That doctor died, because I'm not quite sure whether that doctor knew that he was having Ebola. And this person also died himself. But yes, but I'm sure that he knew that he had Ebola. So that's what might be the case if one is very selfish. Here there is no reason to be selfish. If you land up over here and say, well, I got on board, I have no fever, 2 days later you get fever, you go to the Institute of Tropical Medicine. You call them, or you go there, and then we will deal with that. Or you can call them and say, I feel sick and I've been there, and say, oh, well, then we'll get you up to the university hospital. We put you in a safe box, we'll take the blood, and after a few hours we have the results, and then we see next. So the worst thing that can happen, and that has happened right now, that a person being suspected of being Ebola was hospitalized for 1.5 days over there in the say isolation unit. That's not a big deal, because even if you are isolated in the isolation unit, you are given drinks and food and medicine, and you see doctors. So it's not that you are confined in the Begeitenstraat. It's not the same thing. The idea is, if there's any suspicion that somebody could get ill, for example, in some circumstances can be difficult to judge. Suppose that you have your child staying with grandmother in, say, Conakry. And you want the child to come for holiday, and the child comes from holiday, gets sick 2 days later. And then the child is about 6 years old, and well, she can maybe tell you something about that. Maybe you should tell, yes, I was sick and I went with my grandmother to the hospital. And yeah, then of course, if I hear a story like this, then some alarms go, because actually we cannot control what happened exactly. And so a child, suppose that you are a grandmother with your grandchild, and you go to attend the doctor in the hospital, and you are in the waiting room, and there are some sick people around you that you don't know whether they are infected or not, and the child is running around and touching everybody, and you know that situation counts. So that's sometimes a difficult moment. In that case, we say, okay, isolation, and in that we had a case like that, mother and child isolated, and then of course the test turned out to be negative, and then there was no big deal. But anyway, it's the fact is right now we have favipiravir, so the drug that's also used for flu. So if a person gets ill first day that he has fever, we can get the medicine same day or day after at the latest to start treatment straight away. And that's important to start immediately. So there is definitely something to be said. If there is a suspicion that you could have eventually, even if there's very small chance of Ebola, don't wait a number of days. Because the sooner that you get somewhere to get the treatment, the better your outcome. And that's the message.
Doctor, why not, for instance, if I want to travel to Africa now, like Nigeria, is it not better I take preventions, injection, that to avoid this Ebola?
Yes, that is one thing that we are considering, but the vaccine, for example, the vaccine is not yet available for general use. It will take another few months. Yeah, a few months.
3 months.
Yeah, that may be, yes. If the vaccine is available for general use, you could say, okay, you go to Ebola country, if Ebola is still festering somewhere in Guinea, for example, then you get vaccinated. If we know, for example, that for 6 weeks there is no new case in Freetown or in Sierra Leone as a whole, or in Liberia as a whole, there is no need for the vaccine because you cannot be affected by this. And so many fruit bats are not flying around being ill. The chances that a new epidemic is coming from a new fruit bat infected, well, maybe that takes another 20 or 30 years.
Doctor, you don't understand me. The way I look at it, if I want to travel, maybe I'll take not Liberia airline. I may take Arab airline, and maybe some Liberians or Guineas are there, and we contact as the air hostess started us through, went to the same we see, and we breathe. You understand?
Yes.
Then I go to my country, Nigeria.
Right, yeah.
You know, what will happen? I don't know because it's not in Belgium. It's no longer in Nigeria now.
Nigeria is prepared.
Yes.
They showed it. They showed it by wiping out the beginning of the epidemic. They stopped it in the very early stage.
But what did they use in Nigeria to stop it?
No, actually it was just contact tracing. Actually, everybody who was in contact with the index case was traced and was looked after and was followed and could not escape until the period that you get sick from it was over. For 21 days they were followed. So if no symptoms came in 21 days, of course they was not infected.
Yeah, there was.
And there was actually that case only 20 cases in total. In Mali, only a few cases, and also it was stopped. Why? Because actually people were aware, and when the first alarm goes, everybody jumps on it. So, but you cannot do much to avoid it right away, but in Nigeria it's not a problem, but if you pass first of all through Guinea, for example, and then stay there for a month, and then do health work, and then go to Nigeria, and you fall in Nigeria, then of course you have to report immediately, I might have Ebola, because by that time they might also have the drug favipiravir to begin with. That has been now, given few doses for emergency cases in the countries around over here too.
And the preventing is coming out, doctor, you know already how long it prevents your body against?
For the vaccine?
Yeah.
We think at least 3 months, but we hope a few years.
Yeah, because me, I'm scared to go to Nigeria because I don't want to sit with people in the flight and I contact a virus, Ebola. You know.
Oh, but actually from here onwards it is nobody infected. Then
That's why. Yeah, that's why I don't worry. I have to buy my private jet.
Are you opera? This is another opera.
But then maybe the problem is not necessarily a virus, but maybe the fire. So I mean there is well this is negligible risk because for one time Nigeria has proven that it is serious. Usually I have not too much confidence in things from Nigeria, from what the health authorities and all say, but this time they had it right. And because they have the people. They just have a government who do not use the value of the people the way it should. This time they did, because actually also in the university hospital in Lagos they had to test, to do the test, and they have done that quickly, and the way it had to be. But that means that to contain an epidemic, it's not the doctors, it's the government who has to take action.
Yeah.
I mean, the doctors have to follow, of course, but an individual doctor can maybe suspect, but it cannot stop an epidemic. That's an entire system that has to stop an epidemic. That's a political thing.
I want to hand over to the doctor to explain and to just to teach us, to tell us more about the virus disease, Ebola. Thank you.
Thank you anyway to invite me. Just want to say a small word. I'm not going to talk about the virus. I'm going to talk about the impact that the entire story has on the community. I mean, local community, international community. It has some impact. It has some impact over a year. We've been working for months and months and months, also in Belgium, to get our procedures in order to deal with this kind of threat. And it's because of this virus coming across that we have been now made aware that it exists, and that this kind of threat can really get out of hand and run its course unexpectedly, and we have to react to it.
The doctor has spoken. Do you people have any other thing? Questions to ask in respect of this program today?
Thank you, doctor. As we are novice in the field, as a medical doctor, you represent the Tropical Institute Antwerp. Please throw more light to Ebola. Ebola, when I talk of Ebola, it's not only the virus, but the fear in it. Just enlighten us so we're able to know the preventions, what and what to do at every particular time. Thank you, doctor.
I want to give a talk and to show you some items which might be of interest to all of you, and small excerpts of witnesses who have been there, local people who will tell about what they are experiencing and what kind of trouble that they are in. And this is much more interesting to make us understood the impact of the virus itself. I mean, scientifically speaking, we are making progress, and I will show that also briefly. Although progress in scientific ways, it has been already prepared, and I gave that information in my last talk. This time I could give you some more information of what we learned in the last 4 to 5 months and how we think the whole story could end once and for all. The virus in the environment, and it's that moment, maybe that takes, we don't know exactly how long it takes when when a fruit bat gets ill because of Ebola, how long this fruit bat is getting the infection in a way that it can transmit the infection to some other creature. We don't know how long it takes, probably a few weeks, maybe a few days only. And that's why we see a lot of fruit bats, of course, around, but we see very few outbreaks of Ebola. Why is that? Probably just because of the time span of the effectivity of this fruit bat is very small. And we are not quite sure whether it's only the fruit bat that matters. It might be also some other animals that have not been yet found in a way to transmit the disease. But from the fruit bats, there is quite some evidence that they are at least responsible for parts of the epidemics. And some epidemics of Ebola have been started with chimpanzees dying, and then people finding fresh dead chimpanzees in the woods, and think that it would be a nice bushmeat meal to prepare, and then get infected because of these chimpanzees. They also die from Ebola, and probably they get infected when either by the droppings of the fruit bats, because the fruit bats are picking the fruits, and the chimpanzees are also picking the fruits that are down, and the droppings of the sick fruit bats could in fact have contaminated the fruits down, and that's why the chimpanzees could become infected at their turn. So once in a while in Congo and in Gabon, one has been witnessing a dying of a primate population. All of a sudden, a group of these chimpanzees dies, or gorillas dies. And there is suspicion that this is mainly the role of the culprit of that might be the Ebola virus that spreads from the fruit bat. It's also possible, because actually it has been observed before, that fruit bats are also eaten by chimpanzees. Chimpanzees, they occasionally eat meat, either other apes or rodents, or we think that fruit bat might be also occasionally on their menu. And if they happen to have a sick fruit bat to grab and to eat, of course they get infected in their turn. They might infect their small community, and well, most of them will die, but not all. And some will survive, and they will be immune.
I understand that Ebola started in 1979, somewhere around Congo, according to the history. And in the site that there's a place called Ebola River. I don't know that. You have to confirm it to us. And not, as you mentioned, Congo and Gabon. That was 1979. Now that it happened in West Africa, where does it start from? Is it still Congo or West Africa itself? Because Congo is not West Africa. We really want to know where it started from before Sierra Leone, and Liberia, and the rest of them. Please, Doctor.
It's not quite sure whether it's really linked to one area. We definitely know now that it has been popping up in Gabon, it has been popping up in Congo, even in Uganda, which is about 2,000 kilometers from Gabon. Even in South Sudan, cases have been found with different kind of strains of Ebola viruses, not the same, not entirely the same, but probably with the common ancestor of many thousand years ago, or many hundred years ago. That means that these Ebola viruses are really been circulating among some animals and then from occasionally going to the populations. And in West Africa, it's quite possible that there has been outbreaks, but maybe not recognized as such a long time ago. So people also 7 people die maybe in Guinea Forestière 100 years ago, and nobody knows that it was Ebola. And then because of the transport being very limited, these communities, they died out, and the rest became immune. So the first documented Ebola epidemic is now in that area, but that doesn't mean that there has never been epidemic before. We just don't know exactly.
More questions. The Ebola epidemic that started in 1979. Where is the medicament? The medical, that is the medicament they use for the treatment. Because the medicament they used for the treatment in 1979 Let's also preserve it according to the medical terms.
Yes.
That's your field. Thank you, doctor.
Actually, that was in the 90s, 95, there was an outbreak in Kikwit, and 8 people have been given blood from surviving persons. And from these 8 people who received blood from surviving Ebola persons who had the disease who have recovered already, 7 survived. And that's why we, some of us were thinking maybe this is a good remedy. The problem is that it was not really a controlled trial, and most of the persons who got this blood had already survived for 14 days and were likely to survive anyway, blood or not. So, irrespective of having received blood. That we don't know exactly. So, but other medication, well, that's antiviral medication is something new. Huh? The first antiviral medications that we found only in the 60s and the 70s, and that was against herpes virus, and then afterwards against the flu virus, and it was not very effective. So that's still an ongoing process. So against Ebola, nothing has been really developed up to now. There has been experiments with some drugs, with success in some animal models, but not in all. And in humans, we have now just one drug, I will talk to it, that we tried out, that has also activity against flu, and that seems to have some activity against Ebola in persons not yet very sick. The problem when giving drugs to stop the virus of developing is that it has to be given early. So people come rather late in the disease. They come after 4 or 5 days of fever, and that's a bit late. They should come the first day and be treated the first day, and then have a fair chance that it works. But after 4 or 5 days, they are full of virus, and maybe it doesn't make much of a difference anymore to give at that moment the treatment. So this is a problem. We should have to get the people early into the centers, and that's not really well happening.
Okay, I got a different way for this disease, because, okay, I'm a Kenyan. I was at home in December, and when I asked about Ebola, they told us it's a bat who's living in houses. Yes. That bat, when she comes, she does like so, is the one is bringing Ebola. So now I hear that from also the chimpanzee. Chimpanzee. So that's why.
I think no. Yeah. Actually, the chimpanzees probably get it from the bats. Yeah. And then there are 2 main types of bats: the insect-eating bats, usually the smaller ones. They are not Ebola carriers. It's the fruit-eating bats that are Ebola carriers, and get fruit-eating bats from this size to that size. We don't know exactly whether this size or size matters. In other things, size matters, and maybe in Ebola it doesn't matter so much. So, but it is not quite sure whether all kinds, because there are maybe, well, in all 50 different types of fruit bats flying around in Africa. We don't know whether all these 50 kinds of fruit bats can get infected. The one in the house are usually the insect-eating bats.
It's a bat, but it's not pouring during the day.
Yes, yeah, that's what I mean. But those and what you see here, the insect-eating bats. We do not have fruit bats in Europe. So that means all these insect-eating bats are free of Ebola. So don't worry about that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. As we can see, we are all Africans, though we live in Europe. But yeah, it is, well, according to what we saw on televisions, on VTM, of other channels, it was a death row in Africa for seeing Ebola killing a lot of people, and now, according to what doctor is saying, that the virus came through the chimpanzee. Does it really mean that everybody eats bushmeat?
Not necessarily so.
Yeah, because why I'm asking this question, because I see that the virus, the cause of the disease is not yet known. That is my belief. So thank you.
The cause of the disease is known, but it's not easy to get it, because you have to find the infected bat, that it is infected at that moment. Suppose that you have got Ebola and you survive. For your lifetime you will not have Ebola second time, because your immune system will block the next invasion of Ebola in your body. You see? And that's the same thing with the bats. Bats get infected, but they do not carry the virus for very long, probably only for a very short period of time. And you take 100 bats, and they get disease, not all the same time. They get disease one by one, by one, by one. They're only sick for a couple of days, and then recover like you recover from the flu. So it means that a sick bat has to be very sick in order to have a lot of virus in the blood so that it can infect other creatures. If there is not enough virus in the blood, it cannot infect you. For example, here, we know that, for example, you get infected by Ebola first day that you get fever, you are not very infectious. I can shake hands with you. But if you are very sick after 7 days or 8 days, your body is full of virus, 1 million more than before. So you say in the beginning you have a few viruses per liter blood, and after one week you have 1 billion viruses per liter blood. It's quite a difference. So the chances that you get infected are proportionally to the number of days that the people are sick. And with these bats, probably the same thing. If they are not very sick, they are not very infectious. And maybe because it's the flu virus of the bats, they cope very well with it, and only a few will die from it. And only those who die, they might be infected. They might be infected for other creatures. And probably, you know what the chimps, they find a dead bat that has been dying from Ebola in the bush. The chimps might eat it, they get infected, they might pass it on to somebody else who got fresh chimp meat. You see, that's what sometimes has happened. You do not get infected from eating. You get infected from preparing before frying.
So you see the problem.
Once you fry it, the virus is fried too, so that is not a problem. So if you cook it in a small pot and get it boiling for some time, the virus is dead. The virus does not survive more than 60 degrees. You pour hot water on the creature, but of course, when, for example, you want to prepare a fruit bath, you wear gloves. Should not touch it with your bare hands. And then you put it in a pot after freshly killed. Then you pour boiling water on it and let it stew for a bit, and then prepare it further. Then it would be decontaminated. Or you can actually also prepare it with bleach water. But then, of course, the taste is gone, I guess. Bleach water.
So what I'm here for is to ask for advice for the rest people that are left behind in Africa. What they're going to do to prevent their life from not having Ebola. That is my question.
Not into this topic.
Yeah.
In order to explain that well in an orderly fashion. But that's of course a very important question, and that is part of the topic that I will show. It will come out of that. I mean, you will find the solution to the problem.
Yes, I know that you can hear me, and I feel